All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. My name is Victoria Hendrickson. I'm a partner and vice president on the consulting side at OrgVitality, and I'm really excited to bring today's conversation to you. So today is all about survey experience and innovations unique to 2020. We'll be focusing on some panelists that we have from us today from JetBlue, Intel, and Flowserve. Gonna let the presenters introduce themselves in a few moments here in greater depth. But for our quick intros, we have Mark Vicino from JetBlue, we have Michael Harris from Intel, and Mike Knott from Flowserve. Um, Really excited about these presenters, known them for a long time, and they all have some really valuable experience to share. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. Today's session is being recorded and the slides will be available. So please don't worry about taking detailed notes. Sit back and enjoy what the presenters have to share with you today. We will have lots of time for questions today. Our goal is really to have an informative conversation here. So please enter any questions you have on the Zoom feature. You'll notice the Q&A and chat functions at the bottom of your Zoom panel. So as those questions pop up, please enter those in and we'll capture those at the end of the session. So for today's session, a little bit about our purpose. We're here today because the biggest question we're continually getting from our clients and friends in the industries is, what are other companies doing in this chaotic time and how's it going? So rather than telling you about all the different options and describing what we know other people are doing, we've invited 3 really experienced survey practitioners to share with you the survey work they've done this year. All of them have done something a little different than pre-pandemic times and have learned a lot in this year that they'll be taking forward. I've known and worked with each of these people for a while, and I've been really impressed with how they've navigated this year. So I'm excited for everyone on the phone to learn from each of these cases. In terms of structure, each of these presenters is going to go through their case. They'll introduce a bit about themselves and the specific survey that they're going to be sharing. Then we'll move into some questions to go through their experiences and of course, open it up for questions for all of you on the phone. So again, please do enter those as you have them. So with that said, I think I've done enough talking. I want to get straight to our presenters, and we're going to start off with Mike Knott from Flowserve. All right, Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Great to be on this panel with these really talented people. So let me talk a little bit about Flowserve first. So I've been working at Flowserve for the last 4.5 years. I am the manager of talent assessments and analytics. I've played in a lot of different spaces, but really my core job duty this year was to administer the engagement survey and start action planning. And if you're like me, I heard about Flowserve in my job search. We are really well known in our industry, but it's not like you're going to see one of our billboards driving down the interstate. We are a worldwide leading manufacturer of flow control solutions, so pumps, valves, and seals. We sell the solution. We just don't sell widgets. We are truly global. We have over 17,000 employees in over 50 countries, lots of locations. Some of these locations, especially our quick response centers, designed to be set up in really remote areas so we can get to our customers quickly. And because we're so globally dispersed, there's just no hiding from coronavirus, right? And so that presented some survey challenges for us this year. We really had to. It's so important to gather feedback from your global employee base all the way down to the shop floor level. And historically, what we've done is to get at some of these individual contributors, hourly employees. We've had to rely on paper surveys. And in previous years, we're talking like thousands of paper surveys because that's such a critical part of our population. They keep our business running. We have to hear from them. And in some countries, due to data privacy restrictions, things like that, we can only use paper. So there's the entire countries are they're completely pen and paper style survey response collection. So it just presents some difficulties, right? And one of the ways that we would do that is we would stick a bunch of employees, in like a conference room and pass out surveys. Well, we can't do that anymore to ensure their safety. And so we had to take some precautions as an organization to protect their well-being. I mean, and just some examples. I mean, there's a lot that went into that, but we're talking about social distancing, split shifts. Some sites did have to closed down for a little bit, but they came back up once we gave them a deep clean and implemented these procedures. I mean, I've been working remote since March, so I've been in the office one time to collect some stuff that I needed, and that was it. So we had to really adjust our approach for 2020 quite a bit. And in fact, one of the things that we had to do is we were actually going to launch the survey in April, and so we had to postpone that to October, so we could make sure that we had the right stuff in place. And so that's one thing I think that makes us a little bit successful is we were willing to be flexible. And so we had to answer that question. We had some time from April to October to prepare, but how do we safely and effectively survey our shop floor associates, gather that good feedback, but do it in a way that's gonna, not expose them or put them at risk, and also adhere to like, our COVID playbook, OSHA, our director of safeties, guidance, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and it was tough, not gonna lie. But if you don't mind going to the next slide, I can show you, what at a high level, like what made us successful, because I do think we were successful. We had over 12,000 employees respond to this survey globally. And actually, I was worried we were really going to take a hit on participation, but we beat our 4-year response rate average by about 4%. And we also cut our paper survey reliance by about half. So in previous years, we were doing about 4,000 paper surveys globally, and now we did about 2,000 this year, which, all things considered, I'm very excited about. And look, there are a lot of things that contributed to the success of that. And so these are some of the things that I want to share with you today. One of those was dedicated project management. This is not Mike Not in the back room in a vacuum running this survey administration. This is a team of really capable professionals who supported it. I mean, we had a dedicated project manager because we were moving quickly. We had a lot of we had to be flexible. We needed someone who was dedicated to that space. The second thing was we had really early stakeholder involvement. I actually wish that I had involved them earlier, because we had a cross functional, interdisciplinary team that was part of this project. So I led this team. We had project management, we had HR business partner representation, not just from the group, but from each region. So, Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, Latin America, North America. We had IT representation. Our HRIS team was represented on this project, and we really came together. And honestly, it just would not have been successful without them. And a lot is owed, to their involvement. I think the third thing that really made us successful, and this is a big shout out to OrgVitality, is the technology that we were able to introduce this year. We we've done paper in the past because our employee base is used to it, they know it, but we couldn't do it this year in the same way that we did in previous years. And so, OrgVitality did a great job of working with us to introduce, they may not be, revolutionary technologies, but kiosks and QR codes. They were new to us, and they really were well received by our employee database. So, our employee base. I think kiosks, especially, we led employees one after the other, wiped them down in between administrations. But what was really interesting is we had almost 1,000 employees respond to QR codes, and there was a little bit of resistance at first from before we rolled this out. But once we talked to the HR business partner group, they said, "Oh yeah, I mean, especially in Asia Pacific, they loved this." They loved the QR codes. So yeah, that was a huge win for us. We were able to reduce our reliance on paper surveys that way. Another thing that we kind of had to be flexible on with it was increased communication. So in previous years, when we've done reminders at a very rigid cadence. Well, about halfway through the survey, we were probably sitting at about like a 60% response rate. And I remember going to Victoria and the team, and I was a little nervous. I said, I don't know if we're going to hit our previous years. And so what we decided to do is we decided to increase that communication cadence. We decided to be a little annoying. Jeff said, "How annoying do you want to be, Mike?" And I said, "Jeff, you know me. I've got no problem with being annoying." So we sent a reminder almost every day that final week to the people who had not yet completed the survey, just asking them for that feedback. 2020, the survey is not the only thing that the businesses are doing, and I think it's easy to forget that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. HR, talent management, people analytics. We're not the only ones that are having to be flexible, and so we wanted to be cautious about that. And but we wanted to encourage it, right? It's a balance. The other thing I think really helped us in that is that leaders really owned the message. And that's the next point, that I'll make on this slide, is that leaders really owned and were accountable to that survey participation. I mean, it wasn't just emails sent from the OrgVitality tool. It was global leaders who talked about the survey in their town halls. Our executive leadership really owned this, and that's a big part of it too, right? I mean, you can get emails all day in your inbox, but sometimes it takes a leader to say, "Hey, look, I care about this. This is important to me, and we need to get this done." And then the final thing that I would say really helped us out is an incredibly dedicated and committed global HR business partner group. These are our boots on the ground. We are not set up as an HR function to be physically at every site, and so they really stepped up and were flexible this year. I mean, we did things wildly different than we have in the past, and they were responsive. They were committed to the safety of our associates, and they went the extra mile. I mean, and look, you can always learn something from a project, right? I mean, one of the things that we found out was we actually put one of the weeks of administration over a national holiday in China, and so we missed a few people. But during that second administration week, our HR business partners in China really stepped up, and I mean, we had like a 95% response rate over there, which is huge. So this we literally cannot survey at Flowserve without our HR business partners being a part of that group. And so when I think about what made this administration really successful, that's where I owe a lot of credit. That's where a lot of credit is owed, is just the team that made this possible. Because look, we can send out emails from a center of excellence in Dallas, Texas, but that's not going to get the kind of feedback and the kind of actionable data that we want. And so now, knowing that we have a very, very generalizable, data set to our employee population, we can focus on what really matters, and that's the action, right? That's what do we do with this survey now? How do we handle this moving forward? Because that's ultimately what's going to move the needle. The data's cool. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big data nerd. I love it, but we've got to do something with it and make an impact with it. So yeah, that's what I've learned. I wish there's obviously some lessons learned, but overall, I think it was a great success. And I really attribute a lot of that, if not all of it, to the project team that was a big part of that. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. It sounds like you certainly did have a great team, and one thing that also stands out to me about your case is just the value of really good change management principles. The chaos and unknown of COVID is causing a lot of change, but between your project management, your communication, your stakeholders, just really good change management to get through it. So that's great. All right, from here, we're going to go on to Mark Vicino from JetBlue, who has certainly been busy this year with his program. So take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark. I've been at JetBlue for Coming on 8 years or so, primarily working on this survey program. So I'm happy to share a little bit about that today. So if you don't know JetBlue, we primarily fly planes, and it's been kind of challenging this year. So I'm gonna have a bit of context, and I will try to throw in some survey relevant content. So what happened this year? So much happened this year. 2020 started off pretty normal, but as February rolled around, we did our normal preparation and launched our annual survey towards the end of February, closing in early March. So while our survey is still open, America started realizing how serious this pandemic really is, and large-scale countermeasures need to really happen. So very quickly, everyone's being told, stay at home if you can, don't congregate, use Seamless way more than you should, assuming it's not just me. These guidelines led many customers to really the same conclusion, that they didn't want to travel. COVID has been so enduring and presented us with immense challenges, for us to really balance like our finance, but also safety. So financially, our low point was flying around 10 to 15% of our regular schedule. And at the time, the forecast was rather optimistic about how long this would last. Is this going to be over by September? But it's really been, much bigger than that, and a major blow to the entire industry. From a safety perspective, even if we did want to shut down at certain points, we're considered an essential business. And as part of the CARES Act, which the government passed to provide payroll support to us, we were required to continue to operate, providing a minimal level of service. So also shout out to the CARES Act for helping us survive this. But in regards to flying itself, we wanted to ensure a safe environment for both our customers and also our crew. Our crew members are very used to being flexible. We often face the unexpected, and we really need to respond. However, the fact that we're fighting to save our business requires a lot more than that, because usually we're facing typical like weather challenges. So really, we had to come together with lots of teams to collaborate, generate ideas, put in a lot of overtime, but also concern ourselves with the safety of, for ourselves and also our loved ones. In terms of our operation, we scaled down our support centers, which for us means like our corporate functions and offices, and transitioned to working at home. I say scaled down because our office footprint didn't completely disappear. We have certain teams which operate from our centers that help like direct our planes and people and equipment. And they had to stay open in order for our operation to run. Our customer support team already works remotely, but certain teams for them, continue to work in our support centers. And of course, like for our frontline folks, like our pilots, flight attendants, airports, crew members, technicians, they continue to work in the field and commute to work. So for a while, this was the new normal. Some teams were really working their butts off, but others really weren't sure what to focus on, or their projects had been deprioritized. So they were kind of in hold mode as the rest of the company is trying to quickly figure out a way to save itself. And because our flight schedule was down, many of our frontline crew members really just at home, kind of in hold or holding pattern. Maybe that's a better airline type word to use. So really, how have we listened? So with our annual survey, with our annual survey, we closed pretty early into COVID, so we didn't see really much of an impact to scores. We did see some early concern in the comments for our customers and crew members thinking about how to take care of them and how to adjust their policies. Then in March and April, there's a period of about a month where many of us were just locked inside. Only essential workers, which really includes our crew, were working to support our operation out in the world, working flights. Times were challenging, and for the first time in a long time, leadership felt a really big disconnect with their teams. But at the same time, they knew it really wasn't going so well for a lot of folks. One of the ways that we decided to connect with our crew members is our senior leaders started doing weekly virtual pocket sessions for the whole company. This helped them concisely convey information to crew members and also provide a really great outlet for people to ask questions. And from our perspective, we got to see all the different types of questions that crew members have. So it was like kind of another way of collecting data on what really are the big concerns. And this helped us inform some of our survey content throughout the year. So there was a little bit of apprehension in terms of asking crew members, like, how are you feeling, knowing it's not going well? But we slowly made the decision to listen through a short series of anonymous surveys, which I guess fall under our quarterly pulse. That's kind of the way we've grouped them. So we sent these surveys out between April and May. First, we surveyed our own people department, then our support center crew members, and then our frontline. For these surveys, we focused mainly on topics like safety, wellness, and in general, we found out that crew members were feeling okay, kind of like scores kind of in the middle of, if you're thinking about like percent favorable scores, we scored closer to the like 50, 55 range. But mainly, in general, we found out that the reasons for these were really that, some people were personally impacted by COVID. But on the positive end, some people were really just grateful to have jobs and grateful for everything that we're trying to do to keep the company running. We did see positive sentiment around our response to COVID, communicating throughout the crisis, and trusting our leaders. But one big opportunity area for us is really support for our frontline. For our August survey, we chose then to focus on crew leader support, and crew leaders for us are anyone who is like a people manager. This was really driven based on this past finding that I just mentioned, but also because we knew that one of the ways that we helped sustain our business is we offered voluntary opt-outs for people, where we let them voluntarily leave JetBlue. Because one of the big things that our company has been standing by, and Southwest has also been standing by, is we really don't want to furlough anyone. We don't want to force anyone to leave the company involuntarily, because it's something that we've always had as like kind of like a founding principle, and our leadership has been very focused on that. So, for this August quarterly pulse, we ended up doing a confidential survey, and we shared results with department leaders this time to give them a sense about how they can better support their crew members. So we finished up our final pulse in November, and we just finished sharing results this week. We toyed around with some special topics, but we decided really that we wanted to just check in on a lot of the key metrics that we were tracking throughout the year to hopefully check for improvements. So far, a lot of scores stayed flat, but we saw some improvements in crew leader support, which is great, especially because we focused on that, belonging, and also inclusion. So lastly this year, we also deployed a number of weekly surveys. So if you're getting tired about hearing about all these surveys, imagine running all of them. These were actually specific to our decisions to scale up and scale down our support center footprint. So we worked with what we were calling our scale up team, which is a cross-functional team that's generally responsible for ensuring that our support centers scale up and down in a safe way. So they deal with like on-site testing, all the policies, and separating, like putting the markers down, having people check in with their symptoms before they come in, managing the capacity of the buildings, lots of different topics. So we surveyed crew members who ended up choosing to come in to ensure that we're scaling up in a safe way and help understand really what their major concerns were for, like, obviously I said, like safety, cleaning, capacity, like desk space, conference room space, even like bathrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So the team really did utilize the feedback that we provided to make revisions and address crew member concerns. And more recently, it added this crew member sentiment piece to the discussion in our decisions to scale down our support centers and only permit volunteers to return. Possibly one of the contributors to our recently seeing an increase in the perception of safety while working on site. Okay. Some just really quick thoughts in terms of like what I've learned and like what we're going to do in the future. It's a lot of trouble combining results for anonymous and confidential surveys. One of the reasons why we deployed the anonymous surveys in the first place was because we had almost no time to deploy it. It was like, can you do this like later this week type thing? So we didn't have as much time to prepare our normal panels, but also because we were a little bit hesitant on people actually being honest and talking about their concerns and coming back to the office, because we felt like it's kind of risky to say within a team that you didn't want to come back, especially when a number of our leaders do have a strong appetite for people to be back in the office, because most of our senior leaders were in the office throughout the crisis. Another big thing for us, we deploy our surveys through a business partner, but we end up doing all the reporting and back end really manually. So it's just another thing to consider when you're doing so many surveys in a year. Another big thing that we've been thinking about and that we've held to as our team is choosing to listen only if you really intend to act. Because this, it helps us, have a purpose for our survey and a reason. Because obviously, if you're taking up someone's time, you should provide them some value in return. And also from a branding perspective, to have some sort of rallying cry for particular surveys is a big thing. Of course, we saw not of course, but we saw participation decline over time for a number of our surveys, especially like our weekly surveys. People were very anxious to give us some feedback on what's been going on, but they're less hungry to continue to provide continuous feedback over time, even though we really wanted to track things like wellness over time, week to week. In terms of future plans, so far we're thinking of 2 surveys next year. We're typically an annual survey cadence, but we're going to try to move back to that, knowing that we'll probably have to gather some feedback multiple times next year to quickly show them some change and improvement. I think mostly because we're optimistic that hopefully at the end of next year things will hopefully be getting better. As I'm saying hope a lot because I really, really hope. All right, that's it for me. Victoria, if you want to move on.
Super. Thanks, Mark. It's been really helpful to hear about your range of surveys, especially with the population you have on the front lines. I think some of your surveys about returning to work and how people are feeling are what a lot of organizations are wondering about. So it's helpful to hear from your experience and your learnings. All right, from here, we're going to move on to Michael Harris at Intel. I'm really excited about this presentation. I've heard Michael reference this study he's done at a couple of conferences, and so I was really interested in hearing more about it. And it's certainly a really innovative case study, and I look forward to all of you learning from it. So here we go. Take it away, Michael.
All right, thank you, Victoria, Amanda, OV team for having us today. I was really just came to listen to Mike and Mark, but apparently there's a cost of entry for me, so we'll keep going. We're going to talk about something on a smaller scale now, something that's a pilot study that we tried here at Intel, and this was co-led by my great coworkers Kelly Herwick and Joe Milton on the people analytics team here at Intel. And we had fantastic support from our external partners, Claire and Nimi, and so I just want to give a shout out to them as well. So thanks to all of those folks, and it's my honor to present their work today. So if we could go on to the next one. So something that we wanted to experiment with was, kind of lean into the idea of another variation on continuous or more frequent sensing. This is something we would have tried with or without the pandemic, but the pandemic gave us that extra incentive to try something different with respect to checking in with people more often. So we wanted to experiment with something. And the initial conceptualization of the idea was, what if every Friday afternoon, we sent every member of a team, kind of a team check-in pulse that just said, hey, how was your week? And in the following week, the manager could check in on those results and make sense and have that more frequent kind of check-in and maybe have some insights emerge from something like that. So we were excited about the opportunity to try something with greater frequency and with greater brevity, but we also recognized that there were some potential limitations with this. The first one is a limitation that we see in a lot of the sensing activities that all of us are involved in, which is it would have been another retrospective exercise, but looking backwards. And as we all know, it's hard to put the milk back in the glass after it's been spilled, and there's no point in crying about it. And we wanted to see if we could do something that maybe was a little bit more proactive. The other limitation was the potential for trust issues. So here we are in the pandemic, people are now working from home rather than being in the office on a Friday afternoon. And what if we suddenly hit them with a pulse that might have been interpreted as, hey, it's Friday afternoon, are you still online and still working? And that wasn't, of course, at all the spirit or the intent of what we wanted to test out. So we tried to address both of those, and I'll share a little bit about the design that we came up with and that we tested on the next slide. So we experimented with two innovations. One is that we reframed the pulse as a forward-looking exercise administered for each employee timed just before their weekly staff meetings, with the idea that the manager and the team could identify and discuss any enablers, roadblocks, and help needed in the week ahead. So in other words, setting themselves up for success in the future rather than spending their time diagnosing what's happened in the past. And the other thing we did was we drew inspiration from the progress principle, the notion that accomplishing something in your work each day, great or small, is in itself highly intrinsically motivating and is perhaps a driver of engagement that hasn't gotten enough attention in our sensing activities and in our employee engagement models. And for anyone who's not familiar with the progress principle and the work of Teresa Amabile and Steve Kramer, there's some references in the back of this material, and I know Ovi is going to be distributing it sometime after the session. So let me share just a little bit about what we learned, and I'll be happy to answer other questions if time allows, and we can move on, Victoria. Thanks. So we piloted the design with a 50-person organization made up of roughly a half a dozen sub-teams over a 6-week period, and we just asked for their feedback. Not surprisingly, those teams that were most disciplined about participating and discussing the results on a weekly basis were the ones who were most likely to perceive benefits to their team. And on the one hand, they said the process did help them unearth issues or opportunities that otherwise might not have been emerged or discussed. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those challenges were always resolved for them. So there's something missing from the design in terms of the facilitation of those results or preparation or willingness to commit to taking action that we didn't solve for on this and that we'll continue to think about. And a few other takeaways that we'll share as well. There were weeks where teams and participants, they just didn't have anything new to report or discuss. And when that's the case, it was hard for them to see value in the process. And I think Mark just talked about, continuously and frequently hitting people with, how are you now? How about now? How do you feel now? There's a cost to that. And so we did get some feedback that maybe weekly was too often, and that we should think about something a little less frequent than that. There's also a relevancy, what's in it for me element that needs to be better articulated or offered in order for participants to see that value, particularly when there wasn't something new or emerging that really needed to be addressed. But with a lot of our activities, right, manager and leader support is always critical, and the teams that perceived the most value out of the exercise were the ones where the managers and leaders really leaned into the spirit of the exercise and were disciplined about reviewing those results, trying to drive a conversation on a weekly basis and get value, squeeze the value out of the process. So in terms of the proactive piece of it, participants told us there was value in looking ahead and thinking about the week ahead and having that opportunity to address issues or get help if that was the case and when that was the case. But what they also told us is nobody can predict their week all the time. All of us have surprises in our daily jobs, and so it would be valuable if during the making sense of the data on a weekly basis to both talk about the week ahead, but also to look backwards and say, what was true about how we thought that last week was going to go? What happened versus what we expected to happen, and what could we learn from that and make use of that as well? So having a process that's both prospective and retrospective is something that we would think about doing differently in the future. And then lastly is the thing that these 50 folks had in common is that they were all part of the same organizational hierarchy. That's how they were chosen for participation. But these weren't all employees who had common work deliverables. Many of them work on project teams with people outside of the function that they report into. And we would love to try an exercise like this with a true project team, where everybody who's being pulsed has in common with each other common work deliverables that they're working towards. So something like an on-demand project team effectiveness survey or check-in pulse is something that we're interested in spending more time looking at in the upcoming year. Thanks for letting us share our story with you today.
Thanks so much, Michael. This is really valuable, and it's great to hear about trying new things and experimenting, and I love how this focuses on the goal of the team. So from here, we're going to move into some questions and ask all of our panelists to weigh in on their different experiences throughout the year. I think these cases have shown how they've navigated really a range of challenges and come out with some really successful surveys. So I'm just going to jump in with some of these questions because I'm seeing we're getting a lot through the chat panel. So I want to start with one about priorities. You know, this is a year where there's been so much change, and ultimately we do surveys to collect data and help leaders move forward on their priorities. So the question is, how have leaders' priorities for survey programs shifted? What's important now, and maybe what's been deprioritized?
So I could jump in. I think I mentioned a little bit of this, but I think that priorities for surveys, I think, are up. But at the same time, I think we have to balance how many surveys we're sending to people. And we can probably do that by only targeting specific audiences with surveys if we're going to do them. But leaders are hungrier than ever to get more and more information from people. But we have to try to continue to get quality information. In terms of what's important now and what's been deprioritized, I think the other layer to like this entire year has been the whole like diversity and equity, like I guess movement is a good word to use. It's something that we're focused on, but it's something that has gotten, I don't want to say less attention because our leaders have also made commitments around certain things, but it's gotten less publicity, especially like within our surveys, because we're trying to execute stuff before we come back and say like, what have you thought about this? Give us more feedback. What do we need to continue to do? So it's something that we haven't used as like one of our survey topics yet, because we want to demonstrate what we've things we've already had rolling and want to execute. But at the same time, I think for us especially, we have a lot of financial challenges coming up. We've taken out loans, we have to pay back debt, and we're trying to be very cost conscious. So I think that some of the things that we've had in place to address some of these needs have been deprioritized for the time being, at least.
Mm-hmm. That really lines up with your point of, don't ask if you're not ready to act. If you already know you're going to act on diversity and inclusion, let's just act. Great, that's really helpful and kind of sets the tone for, philosophically, how are we shifting for changing needs? What advice might we have for a project team in adapting to changing global needs? Maybe more on the tactical side.
Yeah, I can jump in with something in that line of thinking. For me, when I think back to what made our survey administration successful, it's really that advanced stakeholder involvement. I think that, like I said, if I could have, I would have brought him in earlier. Thinking back to when we started all this work, Victoria, like almost a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's just such a chief driver of the success of a project like this, just because you have so many moving parts, and in just a roller coaster of a year that's 2020, things are changing constantly. I mean, you think you're going back in the office, and then you're not, and then so it's you've just got to stay close to that team. And there may be some community, like there were some growing pains, right? Like I've never worked in a completely virtual environment before this year, like I'm sure a lot of people. And so you kind of have to give yourself a little grace. You're going to make mistakes. It might be a little bumpy at times, but ultimately, as long as you're anchored on that end goal, and you have you're soliciting that input from the various people on your team, and your customers and your stakeholders, like you're going to be successful.
Absolutely. I like the point you made about there might be some mistakes along the way, but making your best effort and working with the team you've got around you. So the next question we've got here is for trying something new and doing something a little different. This might be best fit for Michael here. What advice would you have for someone wanting to try something unique?
Sure. Well, the pandemic provides a great opportunity to set context, but it's not required. You could set this context at any time, which is whenever you're innovating, trying something new, just being upfront and setting that tone with the participants about the fact that this is an experiment. It's a learning opportunity for both the participants and for the company or the program designers. And when you're willing to admit that you're starting off with something that may be an imperfect design, the participants are much more willing to give you the benefit of the doubt and lean into the process if they feel like they're a part of helping you create something that's going to be of value to them and their coworkers on down the road. I mentioned this point earlier that what's in it for me element is really important, and having a willingness to tailor the design to the needs of the organization that you're working with. So in the case study example that I shared before, that interest in the progress principle was really an interest that we as the researchers brought to the project. But if you saw the slide and you saw that there was also a focus on empowerment for employees in that organization, that was a real need that was particular to that organization that we were working with. And so we tailored the design of the Pulse to meet that particular need for them. And then I guess the last thing is, just as always with possibility thinking, we have to be really self-aware when our design thinking is being limited by what's currently considered feasible or possible. For us to scale something like this up to an entire company or to a large population, we would need a lot more automation than was available to us, but we made the decision to just manually suck it up and do things that we needed to for a period of 6 weeks in order that we could have that proof of concept to say this design will work. And if we'd like it to work, then we need to make the investment in the automation or the other things that will allow us to scale it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really like the point about transparency. If you're trying something new and a lot of people want to participate and help build something. Great. Okay. Our next question here is about benchmarking. Someone has typed in the question, benchmarking is an important part of our culture. Can you share what role, if any, external benchmarking plays in your engagement survey process? And I'll say this is a really important question. One thing we've seen in our surveys throughout COVID is that scores have been really high. And so often if you're looking at benchmarks, it can be hard to compare. So have either any of you thought about how to use external benchmarks during this time?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. I think we have external benchmarks for our annual employee survey. Ultimately, though, I think because I know a lot of companies say this, but Flowserve really is kind of uniquely structured and set up as opposed to some of our competitors. And so we definitely, I think, put a little bit more emphasis on the internal benchmarks, the Flowserve overall, or the kind of the trend over the past few years. Ultimately, we care about the external benchmarks, but there's a greater emphasis on how are we doing against ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, I can jump in on that too. So in general, we use external benchmarks to see if any of our scores are vastly different than the industries or or the global norms per se. But in terms of thinking about a COVID type benchmark, a number of us are involved in the Mayflower Group, which is a survey benchmarking consortium, and we don't directly have any benchmarks for that, but we conducted a number of kind of ad hoc little I don't want to say it's rough mapping, but we did our best to kind of one of the companies did their best to kind of put together a benchmark for us about the kind of the COVID specific survey content. I don't remember all the results, but I remember that a lot of the conclusions kind of were similar to things that we saw internally. For example, a lot of the things that people were saying, trust is up. People aren't feeling that great. Foot wellness is closer to the middle than you would. Well, I don't know if that's what you would expect or not, but that wellness is closer to the middle. But I think for COVID is definitely something of interest because it's it's like such an unexpected thing that we don't really know what to expect because we don't really know what past events we might compare it to. And we don't want to assume that our company, because like for us, like our company's going through a lot more than maybe some other companies. So maybe we think our scores will be a lot more extreme, but I do think external benchmarks can be helpful.
You know, for us, this is an evergreen subject, and it's easier said than done, but we try to remind ourselves that these activities aren't about the scores. They're always going to be subject to a limitless number of influences. And these activities are really just a means for signaling what's important to the organization and trying to drive some consensus around what's going well and why, what can be improved and how, and what actions are we willing to commit to. And that's an activity that has value for any group or for any manager, regardless of whether their comparison point happens to be, and whether it's a benchmark or a trend, suggests that they're flat down or up. So when I have managers who are scoring great on a manager assessment in a given year, I still ask them, is there something that you can work on and something that you want to continue doing? Okay, then there's an opportunity for you. And the same thing with an organization. Your scores are up, you're down. The activity and the value is the same one. What do you get out of that and what commitments are you willing to make?
Great, that's really helpful. All right, the next question is about productivity measures. Are any of you trying to get signal on productivity of your now work from home populations? If so, what are you asking to get a good signal?
We have done some small scale pulsing where, among other things, we've been asking people about their productivity and productivity challenges. I can't think what the verbatim item set is, but what I can share that what we're learning is, and I'm sure lots of you are seeing this, maybe feeling it yourself as well, we have lots of employees who feel overwhelmed by being always on, constantly available to their laptops 24/7 in their home environment now. So for us, our concern is less about productivity because we're demonstrating that we're getting the work done and that we're doing what we need to meet our customers' needs. And our greater concern is how sustainable in this? How can we help our employees avoid burnout during these times?
I would say that I think that getting a sense of productivity is a priority for leadership. I hope it goes the direction of that we find a way to evolve our performance management to better, like somehow better collect data on like either project work or something where you're not just seeing who's in the office and assuming that's productivity. But hopefully we solve these through that versus doing some sort of what's it called, like virtual monitoring. I don't know, I forget the exact term, but I kind of hope that we go in the performance management direction, because I think that people bring up the point of like, if I finish my work, do I have to stick around for another hour? Like, what's the benefit of that? So I mean, I think that's from the employee perspective.
Yeah, our experience is very similar to Michael's. We did a little bit of pulsing in that same space, asking employees kind of how they felt about the work from home experience. And then mostly our global survey is more tailored to our like standardized playbooks and processes. There is that like organizational health component to it, not just the employee engagement, but what does how do our processes are they efficient, that kind of thing.
Got it. Great. Let's see. A question for Michael. The on-demand sounds really interesting. The person is wondering if you know that folks are dropping off with responses because they have nothing new to add, or because they feel it's not worth it or potentially too risky to comment. So is it nothing to add, or my one thing to add might be so sensitive that I'm not going to do it in this venue?
Yeah, all of those things could be true, right? So I think that the person who asked that question, you're spot on. Those are good hypotheses, and I bet we could generate a lot of other thoughts too. Again, why it's so, the manager and leader role modeling, why it's so important that they really lean into the spirit of what it's about and help the team squeeze some value out of the process. Particularly as I shared, the process did some things well in terms of unearthing issues, but it didn't always mean that those issues got resolved. So we didn't arm the managers and leaders with a lot of how-to with regards to facilitation and after actioning. And as Mike talked about, activation is the holy grail of all of this. This is what it's about.
We've got a question in the chat. Has anyone asked employees if they think their company should do more to help society at large, like do more in the community, things like that?
Intel's really proud of the impact that we have on the environment, our position on social issues, et cetera. So we haven't spent as much time asking employees whether we should, but we do ask our employees how proud they feel to be part of an organization that makes those kinds of commitments, as well as what kind of tailoring needs to be done in order for them to feel comfortable or part of that. So, so that's the direction we take that conversation with our employee base.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, Flowserve is definitely dedicated to that area. It's more program focused, I would say, how we solicit the feedback. And so one of our executives launched a program, I believe last year, called Flowserve Cares, and that is a truly global initiative in that space. Where it's kind of owned at a high level, but you have local action going on because we are so globally dispersed. And that's been great. We don't necessarily have an item for employees to provide feedback on like corporate social responsibility per se, but we definitely solicit that feedback in other areas of the business.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, so we've got a question about action planning. There's a lot of surveys going on, and we've been talking about how if we're going to survey, we're going to action. So, in this time, how is action planning different? Are managers too busy with constant changes in the work environment to work on survey results? So some of this might be assuming a more traditional cascade of survey follow-up. An addition to the question might be broadly, how is it different? Is the information for managers to act on? Is it for leadership, et cetera? How do you think about action planning?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit to that because we're starting that right now. I mean, for me, it's not that they're too busy; it's that they kind of want to do too much. And so, really getting them to focus in and prioritize on something. If we've got everybody doing 15 different things, nothing's really going to get done. But if we can focus and move in on one initiative or focus area, I think that's what's really going to move the needle. And so it's for us, there's a lot of energy around this stuff. I mean, people clamor for these results and they want to do something, but they have a tendency to want to go and boil the ocean. And that's not what, we know works. And so, this year, a big part of our action planning initiative is going to be kind of helping our leaders and managers to focus on, what they're going to do and rein in those priority areas a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can jump in also. I think one of the terms I've heard from other conferences or meetings has been action fatigue. I think our leaders are kind of tired of executing stuff for the year. One of the things that we've tried to do and focus on, or at least highlight, is support for our managers. We ask our frontline managers to do a lot, but then we want to take a step back and think about how are their managers and their crew leaders supporting them. So that's something that we want to make sure that we stay aware of versus just always executing or having people carry out orders and so forth.
Yeah, when we set the tone that action planning should be an intensive heavy lift exercise, we create a situation where managers are going to feel overwhelmed by the expectation, whether that's in a panic or not. And this is another one of those easier said than done things. But our aspiration is to try to create a culture where managers and teams are continuously attuning to their own organizational effectiveness and team dynamics with or without a survey event or something happening. And when that kind of culture can be created in the best case scenario, then they start to look at sensing data as useful information that can be confirmatory or course corrective, but not an obligation to completely reinvent their organization in some way.
Mm-hmm. More of a tool to use. Absolutely. All right, so we are winding down on time. So I have a final question, and it's for all of you. And to wrap up, I'm curious how each of you are thinking about surveys in the coming year, and what advice you have for all the folks on the phone today.
Stay safe, be healthy, take care of yourselves, take care of the people around you. That's my advice for the year. Some of the things that we're going to be focusing on the upcoming year here at Intel is, you heard the fellows talk about survey fatigue and action fatigue, et cetera. We're going to try to address some of the employee experience of just the survey programs itself by having better sensing and survey governance at our company. So there are some benefits to having highly distributed sensing activities across HR, IT, corporate services, corporate communications, and ethics team, and so on. But that comes at a cost in terms of, Mark talked about brand. Employee doesn't distinguish between those different corporate functions. It's the company talking to them. So we're going to be looking at ways that we can better coordinate across our objectives, our calendars, our best practices, and driving more integrated insights across those programs to the benefit of employees. So that's one thing for us. The other thing is, we think of our surveys as sometimes asking tactics, and our aspiration is to be sometimes asking and always listening. So in part for us, that means expanding our toolkits to better monitor and measure naturally occurring employee sentiment in social media and in collaboration platforms, and to do that on an ongoing basis. So that's an investment we'll be making in the upcoming year as well.
Great.
Yeah, I think I mentioned for us for the upcoming year, we're planning on doing 2 surveys, getting back to more of an annual cadence. I'm trying to think of any advice that may not be embedded in anything I've already said, but I think I'm blanking right now. But make sure you take care of yourselves. That's what I can think about.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm right there with you. Just to echo Mark and Michael's points, I mean, this year's been really hard on everybody, and there's been a lot of change. And, I think we've got to give ourselves a little bit of grace for 2020, right? And there's I'm sure there's a lot of HR professionals, talent management, people analytics, IOs, whoever on this call. And, a lot of times I find we know the research. We know that burnout is running rampant this year. People are having a really difficult time having that work-life balance and setting those boundaries, and we're stressed and we're anxious. And we forget that you have to take time to deal with that, and we sometimes forget to take care of ourselves, even though we know the numbers and we know the effects of all that. So just to echo their points, enjoy these holidays, enjoy any breaks that you can take. Go on walks. Please wear wear a mask. And I am very optimistic 2021 is going to be a lot better. I know that we will, as a company, are going to be focusing on action planning for 2021. That's going to be a big deal for us, and we want to, results are important, but again, it comes back to what are you going to do with it. And so that's really where our focus is going to be for the next 8 to 10 months, as far as the survey goes.
Fantastic. Really great advice. Wear a mask, act on your surveys. But really, I do appreciate all of your time today. This has been really insightful. I will say also thank you for all of the engagement in the chat function. This is probably the most active I've seen the chat function in all of our webinars. So it's been a really great conversation today, and I appreciate the audience for being active in that, and for our panelists and sharing their experiences. Just to wrap us up here, we will be reaching out to all of our attendees with the materials from today. Part of that we'll be sending links to some of these surveys that we're offering. These are all free surveys about navigating the pandemic, and these are available to any organization that wants to use these. It's our way of giving back and helping folks navigate this time. So with that, we're at time. We'll be in touch with all of you, and thank you again. And as the panelists said, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.